Recording. Going back to my Windows machine. Quick reminder of where we were last time, or going back to where we were last time. 3 machines here in play. 2 operator testing devices, and the box or machine that we sent to the client. The machine that we sent to the client, I like to refer to it as a NUC because both companies that I work at use Intel NUCs, but can be anything. So here I have my Windows machine. I should say, here I have my Windows machine, right? I am SSH'd into my Kali machine. Those are my 2 operator virtual machines. And those in a real environment, traffic from those would be proxied through the testing device that we ship to the client. And I also have a direct SSH connection to the device that was shipped to the client. The reason I have that is for attacks like poisoning that require being on the same broadcast domain, or basically in the same subnet as the users that you are targeting. I just realized that I did not start the VPN on here, so I will. But I believe I did already start the VPN here. Yes, I did. So we should be good to go. Oh yeah, obviously I did because I opened this. So your homework that initially I wasn't going to make this. So when I say homework, optional, if you don't have time, totally get it. I wasn't going to recommend this to everybody. I was initially going to just recommend this to the people who are doing reporting. But after giving it some thought, I think everybody should be involved in this because this is going to be the best way to learn fundamentally what the attacks are and how they work. So what I did, if you go to the templates tab in Sysraptor, I took pretty much every finding that I could think of that is relevant, and I already put the title here and I put the severity here. And basically I put an asterisk next to the ones that still need to be done. So you can see my example that I've already done for you in Secure Protocol FTP. I fully filled this one out for you. Also, if for some reason these fields here are in like a weird order, you can always go up here and just click CPTC practice, and that should put them back in the same order as they will be when you use them in the report. Just kind of a note there. But yeah, you can see my example here where I went and filled it out, and you can take a look at that. And then from there, select however many you want to do. You're going to be the expert on the ones that you select. So if you're like, I really want to deeply understand MDNS poisoning and do that during the CPTC, go for it. Grab that one. What I want you to do is I want you to remove the asterisk, and you can either like add your name here, or you can put your name in the author section. That's what I included the author section for. And then I just want you to go ahead and fill it out to the best of your ability. The sections here, the most important ones are technical description describes the underlying service or mechanism. So it does not talk about the vulnerability. It talks about the actual thing that is vulnerable. So in this case, if this is MDNS, here I would mention MDNS is a multicast domain name resolution protocol used for converting human-readable domain names to IP addresses. Then the vulnerability description would be attackers can send poisoned MDNS responses to MDNS requests to then obtain a man or adversary in the middle position. So that's a description of the vulnerability. Then stress the impact. This section is where you stress the impact to the client so that you make sure that the better you stress the impact, the more likely it is that they'll actually go back in and fix it. So here, I would say something like, if an attacker is able to abuse this to gain an adversary in the middle position, they could potentially, among other things, gain credentials for accounts and then use that to gain access to the domain, blah, blah, blah. Proof of exploitation, you will leave blank. I will fill this out for you. As incentive to fill out these templates, I will only fill out proof of exploitations for the templates that you fill out. So for ones that you don't do, you will not have it during the competition. I apologize. But for ones that you do, you will have commands in here that I will put that explains how to do it. And then recommendation is going to be how you fix it. So if LLMNR, if the machine is domain joined, if the machines that are exhibiting this behavior are domain joined, you can implement a group policy that will disable LLMNR for all domain joined machines. Sorry, MDNS in this case, but same thing. And then references, if you feel like it's relevant, you can add URLs here. So hopefully that walks you through the sections of the report. Why am I having you do this? Well, because doing this, you learn what the vulnerability is, you learn what the underlying service is, you learn what the vulnerability is and what conditions it works under, you learn why it's important, and you learn how to fix it. So what better way to get prepared for the CPTC competition than to take actual vulnerabilities that have been put in here for you so you know they're relevant and fill this out. Okay, and then the two sections that I forgot to mention, summary is just a summary of the vulnerability. So that kind of takes that technical description, vulnerability description, and squashes it into one paragraph or less, like 2 sentences maybe. And then short recommendation is, again, going to be like 1 or 2 sentences on how to fix it. So this would be like implement group policy object. Then from there, if you want to play around with the CVSS score, I would do CVSS 4.0 because that's the latest one. And then you can fill this out if you choose to. If you don't have time, this is the least important. But clients in the real world do like to see that CVSS score because that's what makes this official. Like CVSS is the official National Institute of Standards and Technology framework for reporting the severity of these vulnerabilities. So you can play around with that. And a good tell of whether you filled it out right is it should match the severity that I put here. So if it doesn't match, you might want to play around with it a little bit and change some things to get it to match. Makes sense? So I'm going to give you very detailed feedback on each of these. Once you fill out this template, you will reach out to me on Discord, say, hey, I filled out this template, ready for feedback. I will give you very detailed feedback to try to make this template the best it can possibly be. So some things based on when I graded Neeraj's template is don't use we, don't use you. Everything should be facts that are stated, right? LLMNR is, or MDNS is, it is used for. An attacker could do this, right? That's one piece of feedback. Another piece of feedback, I'm kind of forgetting now what my biggest takeaways were, but assertions. Yeah. What? Assertions. Yes, make assertions, right? And in the report, when you refer to yourself, you're not going to say I or we, you're going to say Cyberhawks blank, or the name of the company. In this case, we're treating the name of the company as Cyberhawks. Cool. So those are the templates. Back to the real deal. I'm going to go to my report. And I'm going to open up. Okay. What did we do last time? Poisoning. All right. So going to the tools directory, I'm going to switch to root because responder requires root to run. So now that I'm root, I'm going to go into the responder directory, which is in tools. As a reminder, the way I organized it is in your home directory, I put a directory called test, which is where you would put scans, and I put a directory called tools, which houses all the tools that you will need. Same thing for this jump box. So this jump box is the actual machine that was sent to the client. Why? Because to do poisoning attacks, we have to be in the client's environment or it won't work. In the real world, we do sudo python3 responder.py -i, the name of the interface, and then -w is what I usually start with. I forgot to get the name of the interface, so I'm just going to do an IPA. We can see that the interface here is ENS18. So now if I do, also I don't need sudo because I'm root, so my apologies. Python3 responder.py -i ENS18 -w. In this case, just because of the way I set it up in this testing environment, just start with W capital F and that will get you the authentication material that you're looking for. In the real world, I would do W for an extended period of time. If I don't get anything, I switch to P for an extended period of time, capital P. And if I don't get anything, I do W, capital F for a short period of time, because this will create pop-ups in certain cases, and you don't want legitimate users to be complaining about pop-ups. So, boom, we're listening for events. Hopefully we'll get one soon. As a reminder, we eventually got that hash for user RPAI or RPI. From there, we were able to crack the hash for that user in Hashcat. So I saved it to a file called like hash.txt or something, and then we cracked it with this command right here that's showing up because I've already used it before, right? And I just used the RockU word list. In the real world, your company would have word lists that they recommend you use. Sweet, 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 sweet. Also, if this isn't working yet, I'm gonna be like so mad. I don't know why it like sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work. And it always works when I test it myself, but then whenever I'm doing the demo, that's when it decides, we're not gonna work anymore. So I'm just gonna log in on the actual machine. But no big deal if you can't do this, because you already know the password from this presentation, so you can just assume it worked or pretend it worked. Oh yeah, it did work. I just had to wait for it. I was a little impatient, but it worked. So we grab this hash, save it to hash.txt, and then we cracked it, right? And then from that, we learned that the password for the user was 123456. Now, I showed you two different ways of then using those credentials in Windows. I'm just going to do one for the time being, because you can always go back to the previous video if you want to see the other one, which was Rubius. But run as net only user CPTC / first you put the domain. It does not matter if you put cptc.local or CPTC. CPTC.local is known as the fully qualified domain name, whereas this capital CPTC is, I believe it's the NetBIOS name or something like that. But either way, it doesn't matter. RPI, PowerShell is the program we want to start. Boom. 123456, that is the password that we cracked. And hopefully, sometimes PowerShell is a little slow, it takes a little while to boot up, but PowerShell should work for us. A little trick is if PowerShell takes forever to load, what I'll do is I'll just use command prompt, and then within command prompt, I'll say PowerShell, and that'll start a PowerShell session too. But, you know, I like having it separated out, and it did load anyway. Going back to my tools directory. Okay, let's talk about PowerShell, because you're going to be using PowerShell a lot. I want you to be comfortable with PowerShell. In PowerShell, specifically Active Directory PowerShell, which is what we're going to be using here. First of all, every command is known as a commandlet in PowerShell, and it's always in the form of verb noun. So for example, if I want to get a user, I say get Active Directory user, right? Get AD user. So verb noun. There are some verbs that are common to most commands in PowerShell. So for example, get, set, remove, add, new, all of these, you'll see them come up time and time again in all of these different AD PowerShell commands. Okay, when we're using AD PowerShell specifically, if we're on a domain joined machine, we don't need this. But since we are not on a domain joined machine, we need to explicitly specify where we're going to authenticate to. So we're always going to authenticate to a domain controller, because under the hood, what AD PowerShell does is it performs LDAP queries, or I forget the other kind of query it performs, not LDAP, but yes, essentially LDAP queries to the domain controller. So we're going to have to specify the domain controller. So in this case, the domain controller is dc1.cptc.local. We talked about how to find the domain controller in the last session. Of course, I forgot to provide all the other things I need to provide, right? So if we use get AD user, we have to specify what user we want to get information about, right? So in this case, let's say I'm searching up RPI. Now I'm going to get user information about user RPI. Also, these flags doesn't matter what order I put them in. I could have put -server dc1 cptc.local after rpi, and it would have done the same thing. Point is, we have this response here. Now, the really cool thing about PowerShell that differentiates it from a normal command line is everything is object-oriented. Meaning, as you can see with the output here, it returned an object that has a bunch of variables, or it has a bunch of properties, right? So this first property, distinguish name, then we have a property called enabled, then we have a property called given name. Let's say I want to pull out specific properties from this output. So let's say I don't need all this information. I only need the name, and let's do the SID, or the security identifier. I think it's what it stands for. Could be wrong, but I can pipe this into select, and I can specify which ones I want to pull out. So I'll do SAM, account, name, and I'll do SID, comma separated. This space is optional. I just like to put a space for readability. I could also do it like this. And now if I rerun that command, you'll notice that it gave us only the SAM account name and the SID. Now, this can be displayed in two formats. It can be displayed as a table or as a list. So as you can see here, it was displayed as a list. Here it was displayed as a table. By default, if you use something like select, PowerShell makes its best judgment as to which one it should use. However, you can explicitly specify another one with the format table or format list commandlet. I should mention, remember how I talked about everything is verb noun? So actually the full command here is select object. So the verb is select and the noun is object. Select is just a shorthand notation for that. So similarly, if I wanted to display this information as a list, there's format list, but the shorthand notation for that is FL. So now you can see I have that in list notation. Another way I can display it is in table notation like you saw before. If I want to explicitly specify that, that's format table or FT. Beautiful. Then some other things you can do. Let's say let's say that SID, this is maybe not a good example, but let's say that SID was super long for some reason and it truncated it, like it said, it showed you most of it and then put ... at the end, but you want to see the whole thing. You can add, if you're using FT or format table, you can add -wrap. And what that's going to do is it actually displays the whole thing, but if it's too long, it just like puts it on a new line, wraps it, just like you would wrap text in a text editor. Okay, cool. So we have that. Another thing is, let's say your output has a ton of stuff. What I mean by that is, okay, in this case, we only have one user, right? So it's not that much. But let's say you ran a command that selected hundreds of users, but you want to provide that information to the client. An easy way to provide it to the client is to export it to a CSV file. A CSV file is kind of like an Excel file. You can open it in spreadsheets, Excel, and then you have like you have the type or you have the property name, I should say, and then you actually have the values in separate rows. So that's really useful if you have long output and you need to provide it to the client, which comes in handy. Like for example, I'll give you an example here just to give this some real world applicability. If we go to, let's do like low privilege account with admin count set. The admin count is, just to give you a little bit of background on this, the admin count is a property that gets set when a user is part of an admin group. Low privilege accounts should not have this property set. If that property is set, then that means that that account was part of an admin group at some point, which could be an indication that it had excessive privileges at some point. And maybe some of those privileges are retained, right? Or maybe it was the result of an attack. But a lot of the times in real world environments, when I list users that have this property set, I get hundreds of users that were at one point or another in an admin group. And so at that point, I want to provide the client with a list of those users, but it doesn't make sense to just like try to copy and paste from this window, like this huge list of users. So at that point, I would export it to a CSV file, and I would say, take a look at the CSV file for a complete list of domain users that are affected. So just to show how I would do that, first I'll use select to select the properties that I want to include in that CSV file. So in this case, we'll do SAM account name and SID. Then I'm going to pipe that into export CSV. Another thing I like to add is no type information. because otherwise it'll include some like unnecessary information about what type each property is, and you don't necessarily need that in most cases. And then the name of the CSV file. So we'll say rpi.csv. Boom. And then I don't know if I have like I don't know if I have Excel spreadsheets on here, so I may not be able to just like show this right away. But if I go to C Tools, yeah, I don't have Excel spreadsheets on here. But what I'll do is I'll transfer it to my host machine where I do have spreadsheets. And if I open this file, you'll see what it looks like. Of course, it's going to be super slow. But the point is it'll put it in like spreadsheet form. Another thing you can do to work with large output that's not going to be useful for a client but might be useful for you is output grid view, or OGV for short. So if I pipe this into OGV, this is actually going to bring up like a little window, and then I can view that same information in kind of like a spreadsheet form, but it's just going to show it directly here instead of me having to download a spreadsheet. Also, right now it's taking absolutely forever, and I have no idea why, but hopefully it'll open at some point eventually. Okay, yeah. So see here we have a nice, basically spreadsheet, but it's just another way of viewing the output. If you have hundreds of users, this might be a little easier way of seeing it than using a table or a list, right? Okay. Anyway, now that the spreadsheet's loaded, you can see in the spreadsheet we have SAM account name, RPI, and SID, right? So that's just how we work with PowerShell output, the different options that we have, just so that you're comfortable with that. Okay, but when we first ran this, you see it gave us back these properties. This is not all the properties that are available, right? There are more properties that I can choose from. And the way I can see all of them, or I guess the way I can select individual properties that I definitely want to have, is by using dash property. So dash property is for one, dash properties is for multiple. So in this case, let's say I wanted to include the property, let me think of one off the top of my head. Like let's say I'm looking for constrained delegation. Hotfixes probably wouldn't apply to a user account, but yes, for a computer account, yes. But I'll just do like MSDS allowed to delegate to. And that's going to additionally include that property here. In this case, I don't think that property is actually filled in, so it didn't include it. That's just because there was no value set. But if there was a value set, it would have included that property. So maybe this wasn't the best example, but you get the point. If I try one that doesn't exist, I think it's going to error out. Yeah, it errors out. So you know it does exist. It just didn't show. Okay, but point is, how do I get all properties? To get all properties, you can use the star wildcard. So as you can see, there are a ton of different properties related to users, and that's why it doesn't show them all by default. If I wanted to just see a list of these properties so I can select specific ones without seeing all the values, which kind of clobber this up, I can pipe this into member. The full command, I believe, is get member, but the shorthand is member. And what this does is it shows me the property on the left-hand side. It shows me what kind of property it is. So, for example, equals and contains are functions rather than like values. And then on the right-hand side, it tells us the actual like property type. So, for example, this is an integer. This is a Boolean, so a true or false value. If you're in comp sci or you're familiar with programming, this object-oriented approach should be pretty familiar to you because basically object-oriented, right? And here the properties are like variables, and here you have the variable types. Okay. Yeah. So now let's say we want to use this get AD user. Okay. Sorry. Next thing I want to talk about. Let's say I want to search across multiple users. One way I can do that, I have no idea if this will work or not. Well, okay. The way I search across users, and this works for a lot of AD PowerShell commands and not just get AD user, is I can use a filter. So if I say filter, and then here I can search for something specific. So the way I like to do this, you can do it in double quotes, or you can do it in script block notation, which is using these. I prefer to do it this way just because that's how I prefer to do it. But let's say we're looking for users where that are, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example here, where that don't have the description field empty. Let's say users that have a description, right? Let's say, I'm guessing it's going to be description. If this doesn't work, I'll actually look it up here. Actually, we can check. Is there a property called description? There's a property called description, right? So I can say description, and then I can say is not equal to null. So description is not empty. And if you're curious about this, like these operators here, there is a Microsoft or Windows page that details all of these operators, but the ones that I know personally off the top of my head are any for not equal, EQ for equal, like for basically the same thing as equal, but you can use wildcards, GT greater than, LT less than, contains, and not contains. So let's say I did this, and let's say I want to grab a table, I'm going to wrap it, and I just want the SAM account name, and I want the description. Now, the interesting thing about this is even though I'm filtering for users that have a description, I didn't explicitly specify that I want to pull out that description property, which it doesn't show by default. So I'm going to also have to say property description, and then that tells it to also, in the results, return that property. Any questions about that? I know that's maybe kind of confusing, but this is the search, and then this is telling me I want that property. And then that might take a little bit because it does have to like go through all the user accounts. But as you can see, now we have a nice table where we have the user account name and we have the description for that account. Which brings me to the first vulnerability that I wanted to show you guys. Passwords in user description fields or computer description fields. A lot of the times administrators do not realize that this description field can be queried by everybody who has domain access. They think, oh, okay, this is just an optional description, right? So this is for me. But no, anybody can see that. So now we have K-Stern, and in that description, the admin put that their password is password. So now we have their password. Make sense? I did include that as a template here in case you're curious. That is high severity to me, in my opinion, because it requires being authenticated, but it lets you gain access to another user account. So I have clear text password in user description, clear text password in computer description. Okay, cool. We're learning how to work with PowerShell. The other way I could do this, kind of fancy, is let's say I grab all the users with this filter. So I can just say filter star. A star is a wildcard that says grab everything, right? And then I can use where. And I believe the full term for that is where object, but the shorthand notation is where. Or you could, I believe, use a question mark. It's either question mark or percentage. I always forget which one's which. I think it's question mark. But I can say where, and then I can kind of do the same thing. So I can say description not equal to null. This would essentially do the same thing. And then I could, of course, pipe it into format table. The difference between this is it's a little less efficient because this is directly querying the domain controller for this, whereas this is querying the domain controller for a complete list of domain users, right? And only then it's filtering on that list locally. Hopefully that makes sense. Question?
Okay, so first question, this command is supposed to be queried by everybody, no matter what kind of privileges you have?
Yeah, so any domain user can run these commands that I'm running right now. RPI is a low privilege domain account that I did not assign any special privileges. So yes. Yep.
And so you ranked it as high for the calendar. Is it, in general, would be high if so
yeah.
Would you execute the command and then you see that, oh, like some users have their passwords on the description and then you would rank it as high, or no matter what, even if you didn't find passwords on the description field, it would still be high?
No, it's only high if I find a password, right? Because you can put random descriptions here, like this is the default description for the administrator account, right?
Okay.
So having descriptions is not a big deal, but having the password there, I can also validate this password by going back to my Kali machine. Hopefully we're connected. cptc.local. Username was kstern, if I remember. Password. And we'll see if that works. If this doesn't work, I'll just do it on the machine that's in the environment, because it's definitely going to work there. Oh my gosh, of course, there's no netexec. That's fine. It didn't work probably because I didn't fix that. Remember the DNS? Oh, this didn't even run. There we go. Sorry, I didn't actually connect to the VPN, so now hopefully it'll work. But let me just make sure we don't have any DNS problems. Okay, yes. This is what I was talking about. If you have something like this, you're just going to have to change this manually. So I apologize for that. We change this to cptc.local, and I'm going to get rid of all these named servers. And I'm just going to say name server 192.168.12.10. Thank you. Oh my gosh, did I not run this as root? I probably didn't run this as root. No, I didn't run it as root because I'm a silly boy. Now it'll work. Also, same problem as last time that I fixed last time, but I didn't fix it this time. Sorry guys, I should have done this in advance, but I did not. Open tab. This is just because I ran a really old version of the script, and I keep reverting to the same snapshot every time I boot my Kali machine. And so I fixed this problem once, and then it's back there again every time I revert it. But I really should create a new snapshot, but I'm just lazy. Okay. Kali. Okay, cool. Yes. Now I'll be able to edit this. cptc.local name server 192.168.12.10. I'll also just add another one just in case we need to do like reaching out to the internet. Okay. Now look up cptc.local. Yes. Now if I run netexec, that should work. Not just netexec, but I have to actually do that. There we go. Okay, so we have the plus sign, so we validated that that password works, right? Okay, sorry for the detour there. All right, anyway, getAdUser is not the only commandlet, obviously, that's there. There's a bunch of ones. The ones that I have memorized off the top of my head: getAdUser, getAdComputer, getAdGroup, getAdGroupMember, which tells you the members of groups, and getAdObject, which gets both users and computers, and getAdDomain, which just gives you like basic domain information, but I like to use that to prove that I'm logged in, right? Because if you run getAdDomain and you don't have valid credentials, or you entered the password wrong, then that'll error, as will any of these, to be fair. Okay, so first thing, let's go down the line. Let's see unconstrained delegation and constrained delegation, right? So to help with this, I'm just going to grab RPi. It doesn't really matter. I'll say property, or I'll say properties all, and I'll say member. And then I'm looking for something related to unconstrained delegation, which I know because I've done this before. It should be something like trusted to auth or trusted for delegation. Trusted for delegation. So I believe they have like a lot of different, in AD PowerShell, they have for delegation specifically, they have a lot of different names for the same things. So I believe trusted to auth for delegation is going to be constrained delegation, but it might be RBCD. I'm not entirely sure, but I use a different one anyway. So I'll show you that when I get to it. But at least for unconstrained delegation, we have this trusted for delegation property, right? Okay, cool. So let's do this filter here. Filter, sorry, dash filter, trusted for delegation. I forgot these things. Is not equal to null. So if it's not empty, if there is actual value there, then we know, or actually, sorry, trusted for delegation, if we take a look at this, I'm kind of getting it mixed up here. BQRST, should be a Boolean, right? Boolean. So we're actually, this is true false values. So I'll say if it's equal to true. And I might need quotes around this. I'm not 100% sure, but I'll try it without quotes, and then we'll see if it works. And the properties I want to pull out, I'm just going to grab the SAM account name. I actually don't need to specify this because this is one of the ones that is pulled out by default, but I'm just going to include it there for the sake of including it there. And trusted for delegation, just to like prove that that is true, right? And then we'll say format table, wrap, SAM account name, trusted for delegation. And looks like there were no users that were trusted for delegation, but we also have to try computers. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing, and instead of saying get AD user, I'm going to say get AD computer. And here we have computers that are trusted for delegation. We, of course, domain controllers have unconstrained delegation by default. That's because if you've compromised the domain controller, I mean, you already have control over the domain. Doesn't matter. But the server one is interesting because that's non-default. So at this point, what I'll do is I'll grab this. I'll go back to my report. I'll add a finding, and I'll use unconstrained delegation. I'll use the template. Boom, create from template. And all this stuff is filled out. Now, the only thing I have to do is I have to put this proof of exploitation. So I gave you some sample proof of exploitation, which, as you can see, includes that command that we just ran. But then in the end, I'm just going to delete this for now. I'm going to keep the verbiage because the verbiage is kind of useful to have. Using PowerShell's Active Directory module, Cyberhawks observed domain accounts that had the trusted for delegation flag set, including domain computer server dollars, right? Or actually, since we're referring to the computer itself, I can just say server. Then I'm going to get rid of the rest of this. Boop, 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 boop. And sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. And then the other thing I'm going to do, we don't need this one. I might add it back in later. We're gonna include a code block so that it's nice and fancy. And boom, now we have a code block that includes the proof that, that there is an account marked for unconstrained delegation. The other thing we can do, and I forgot to copy it earlier, so I'm just going to Control Z a bit so I can do this, is we have these special characters that allow you to highlight in sysreptor. So I want to draw attention to the fact that in our output, we have server, right? And that's true. So to draw attention to that, I'm going to enclose it in these characters. And then I have to also say, I will also say that this is PowerShell, so that then it highlights it as PowerShell. And I think it's like, man, I keep forgetting now, highlight syntax or something like that. Gosh. Highlight manual, that's what it is. Highlight manual, boom, and now you can see that it's highlighted, which is really nice to draw attention to that. So, and then just to show that this is a command versus this is the output, I'm going to put a little caret symbol to be like, this is the command I ran. Make sense? So I know that took a little bit of time. I was going through it kind of slowly, but this is how I would write my proof of exploitation. Using PowerShell's Active Directory module, CyberHawk's observed domain accounts that have the trusted for delegation flag set, including domain computer server. And then here we have the command, and we have this highlighted. Very clear proof, right? Could not be clearer. All right. So obviously we don't have control over the server account, so we can't abuse unconstrained delegation yet, but we know it's there. Now let's look for constrained delegation. So for constrained delegation, I'm just going to use MSDS allowed to delegate to. MSDS allowed to delegate to. And this one is not a Boolean value because it actually specifies what that account is allowed to delegate to, right? Because it's not unconstrained. Unconstrained is just like you either have the privilege or you don't. But this one, you have it for a specific service. So not equal to null. And then for properties, I'll pull out the SAM account name, and I'll pull out that MSDS allowed to delegate to, and I'll format table. Oh shoot, I pressed enter. I did not mean to press enter. Sad days. All right. Okay. First, I'm not going to include wrap, and I'll show you how it truncates the output. Watch, it actually won't truncate it, which will be really funny. And then this will be me saying this will be for nothing, but hopefully. SAM account name, MSDS allowed to delegate to. Boom. It did not truncate it. If it were longer, it would have truncated it. And then I would have had to include -wrap, right? So, cool. We have constrained delegation for PC2. So if we have access to PC2, it looks like we can gain access to server, right? And remember, this service can be anything we want it to be because we can change the service name. We just can't change this part of it. So we basically, if we gain control over PC2, we have full control for server. And if we gain control over server, we have unconstrained delegation. So we're going to use that to then gain control over the domain and compromise the domain. So we're starting to come up with an attack path here. I did include constrained delegation as a finding. I kind of went back and forth. Oh, sorry. I was doing this here before, but now I'm doing it here. I went back and forth on whether or not to include it because it is a very legitimate thing that is like necessary in certain cases. But it is nice. I decided where I work, we do point it out. And I decided, yeah, it is nice to point it out so that they know that there is constrained delegation, because if that account does not need constrained delegation, it should not be configured, right? Yeah, this is to call out that there should be no delegation unless it's actually needed. You can also recommend resource-based constrained delegation instead, because it's a little, depending on how it's set up, I guess I shouldn't say that it's more secure either way, but it's good to call it out that that's an additional option. So here I'm going to put my command. And here I'm just going to copy this wording from here to make it as seamless as possible. And we'll say using PowerShell's Active Directory module, CyberHawk's observed domain accounts, and I will say configured for constrained delegation, including machine account PC2. When I'm referring to the account, I include that $sign because machine accounts have the $sign at the end. If I'm just referring to the computer, I like to not put that $sign at the end. Just put the name of it, right? And then just like here, where we wanted to draw attention in the output to that piece right there, we can again include these characters. We'll say PowerShell highlight manual, and then we'll include these characters. And now this highlights this, and then we'll do this. And I wrote my second finding, right? So you can kind of see the process that I'm taking here. And then at this point, once this finding is fully written, the rest of these should be templated for you, so you won't have to make too many changes. Any change that you will have to make will be replaced with a to-do. So in sysreptor, this is a nice thing about sysreptor. Whenever you put to-do, it's highlighted like this, so it's very clear that you still have to change it. And then, of course, now this is ready for review. So I can say status, and I can change this to ready for review. And then usually a second consultant would come in, take a look at my finding, and either mark it as final or finished, or they would provide me with feedback like this could be worded a little bit better, you could maybe show this a little bit differently, and then they'd put it as needs improvement, right? And then I'd go back and I'd make revisions. So anyway, so for these, I can already put them as ready for review. So there are kind of two approaches to reporting. Approach number one is do it as you're going along. So that's what I'm doing here. As I'm running these commands, I'm right away going into the report and I'm creating that finding and writing it up. The other approach is to just grab the evidence that you need. So I would just grab that command and I'd throw it in there, but I wouldn't fully write it up. And then once you're fully done with the test, then you can go back in and you can write up those pieces of the report. So it just depends how you want to approach it, and also how the company, any limitations that they have for you. But those are kind of two approaches that I've seen. Okay, so we have constrained delegation, unconstrained delegation. Beautiful. So we know that PC2 is of great value to us. So one thing that I like to do, I have user creds, right? I have RPI. Let's see if they have any kind of access to PC2. So we'll say NXC SMB PC2 dash user, and you can ignore the other stuff that I've been doing that maybe from last time. RPI dash password 123456, and we'll like list shares because why not? But the thing that I'm most interested in is if we see pwned here, because if we see pwned here, that means we're in the local administrator group on that machine, which means we basically have control over that machine. In this case, we don't. So while we can log into that machine, there's no way for us to like we'd have to do something locally on that machine to compromise it if we're going to compromise it, right? Anyway, the other place that I'm gonna check is let's go to Bloodhound and let's see what we can do. Let's say I'm gonna search for a path from RPI to, for example, PC2, and we'll see if I find anything. I may not. I did find a path from RPI to PC2. So as you can see, it looks like everyone, this view is kind of a little annoying for me, so I'm going to change the layout here to sequential. There, that kind of makes more sense to me. So as we can see, everyone has generic right over PC2. And we can see that RPI is a member of domain users, so they're a member of authenticated users, which is a member of everyone. So with these, abusing these privileges, looks like we can actually compromise PC2. So now we can see the full attack path, and now it's just about playing it out. Also, we notice that everyone should definitely not have generic right over this computer, right? I mean, I shouldn't say definitely, maybe there's some weird configuration that it is required going on, but in any case, that would be a finding. So I'll say, I forget what I call this one. I think it's like excessive privileges domain group, or excessive privileges for Active Directory object ACL, right? Create from template, boom. Now we have that one. And the way that I like to show this, and I'm not going to do this here, is rather than showing it in Bloodhound, which the client is unlikely to have Bloodhound, or well, they could install Bloodhound, right? But they're unlikely to know what it is right off the bat. And so seeing that might be confusing for them, like how do I replicate this? So I will use AD PowerShell, and what I will do is, I don't know the command off the top of my head. I'd have to like look at an old test and grab it from there. But use get ACL, and you can use get ACL, an AD PowerShell command, to show the privileges that everyone has over PC2, right? And so then I'd actually put that here and write some wording that I'm just going to avoid doing for now so that we don't take forever writing up every single one here, right? But then once I'm done writing this up, then we go, ready for review. Cool. So going back to Bloodhound, okay, how do we actually abuse everyone's privileges over PC2? Well, like we talked about before, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to thehackerrecipes.com because I want to point out this really, really nice diagram that they have, or the hacker.recipes, whatever. If we go to movement and we go to DACL abuse, if I just click on that, if you're a mind map or diagram person, the hacker recipes is for you. They have so many. So I'm just going to open this in a new tab so you can see a little bit better. Open image in new tab. And you'll notice that they they list this out for you. So in this case, we have generic write, if I remember correctly, generic write over a computer. So we can do anything that's under this generic write section. So basically any of these, right? And we're looking for a computer. So here we have little computer icons. So our options here are Kerberos resource-based constrained delegation, shadow credentials, or SPN jacking, which we didn't talk about, but like I never use it because one of these other ones usually works. So in this case, let's try resource-based constrained delegation. Also, if you're curious how to do that, going back to hacker recipes, they're like, oh, look, if you want to know how to do Kerberos RBCD, we have a page about that. And look at that. They provide you with commands right here to do it in Linux and to do it in Windows. So I thought I was going to give you guys a cheat sheet, but then I looked at the hacker recipes and I'm like, they already have cheat sheets for everything. So there's not even a point. But this is basically what we're going to do. So in order to abuse this, in order to abuse resource-based constrained delegation, we need control over a machine account. The reason we need control over a machine account is because the way it works is one service is going to be grabbing service tickets on behalf of a user to another service. In this case, service is anything with a service principal name, and machine accounts have a service principal name. I talked about this in previous seminars, so I'm not going to go over this again, but point is we need to have a machine account. So how do we get a machine account? Well, by default, users in Active Directory can create up to 10 machine accounts. That is in case they want to join computers to the domain, right? So for this one, normally I like to use AD PowerShell wherever I can, but I've had so much trouble getting this to work in AD PowerShell that I just use Impacket for this. So I'm just going to use Impacket. But I can say add computer.py, which is an Impacket tool, -h. And the way Impacket tools work is they all kind of follow the same structure, where you put the domain name / the username : the password at the target. In this case, there's no specific target. We're just doing it for the domain, right? If you don't have a password, but you have a hash, you would not put the password and you would use -hashes, and then you'd put : the hash. But in this case, we have a password. So we'll say cptc.local/rpy. The password was 123456. And then let's see what other options we need to specify. We can specify the computer name and the computer password. So computer name. We're not actually creating like a physical computer. We're creating a computer account in Active Directory, right? Just wanted to make that clear. But each physical computer that is domain joined has a computer account associated with it. Okay, so the computer name, I'll say Cyberhawks. Whenever you are creating, I'll put a $ at the end too, because that's kind of customary for machine names, although it really doesn't matter. Whenever you are creating a new account for testing purposes, like a machine account or a user account, always include your company name in that account. That is so that if somebody sees, oh, there's a weird machine account that's been created, they're not questioning it. They see the company name, they know you're doing a pen test for them, they know that it's your account. The second thing is if you ever do a bad job of cleaning up, which you have to clean up the environment, every single thing you do, you have to undo at the end. Or if you can't undo it, like if we create this machine account, we aren't able to get domain admin, we can't remove the machine account, then we have to let the client know that there's residual machine account there that they have to remove. But in the event that you don't properly clean up after yourself, in the future, if they ever see that machine account, they'll know, okay, we can remove this because it was part of the test. Cool. Anyway, computer password. Oh my gosh, sorry. I think it was computer password or computer pass. I have a password that I don't mind exposing publicly that I like to use for demos like these, but you should use a secure password, right? Don't expose them to any vulnerabilities that weren't already there. So in this case, I'm just going to use my demo password. And then I think that's all we really need to add a computer account to the domain. I'll also specify the DC IP just in case we need it. Again, if you don't know the IP address of the DC, you can always say nslookup dc1.cptc.local. Boom, we have the IP address. Put that in here. Okay. Running this, we have now added a new machine account. Since we know the password of the machine account, we have control over the machine account. I can test that by saying nxc smb, and then we'll just do cptc.local. Just like I'm testing all the other credentials, I'll test this machine account. Cyberhawks $-p, which is, oh, I forgot the quote at the beginning. I'm using single quotes, by the way, because I have that @ symbol as a special character. In this case, I have a $ symbol. In this case, I have an @ symbol, but just so it knows that it shouldn't treat those as special characters, right? That's why I'm using single quotes here, which I'm very terrible at remembering to put my quotes. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, we have this plus, which indicates we did successfully create the machine account. Okay, that's another vulnerability that users can just create machine accounts. Technically, okay, it is default, but in most cases, that's not necessary. So we're going to report that. So I'm going to go back to my reporting tool. Now I'm going to add I think it's MSDS machine account quota greater than 0 right there. And then in proof of exploitation, I can show myself creating that machine account. Now in this case, two things we have to do. First thing we have to do is we have to redact any passwords or any privileged information. Not that it matters because we set this arbitrarily and we're going to clean it up afterwards, but it's still a good practice to redact all passwords. So different companies do this differently, but in this case, I'm just going to say redacted. And I have to redact it here also. The other thing is the client may not necessarily know what IMPACT is. So in my description, I will say using IMPACT add computer.py cyberhawks validated the ability for, no, I have to think of this. I always spend a long time like pondering over these descriptions, and then I keep editing. And then what I'll do is I'll actually take descriptions from old tests and just copy them over once I have like one that I really like. So that's why then they get really seamless. And then when you actually deliver the report to the client, it's like every description is super thoughtful and like succinct. But another thing you can do is you can always use ChatGPT, which is a wonderful resource for many things, not just knowing how to abuse this, like use AD PowerShell to check for computers with constrained delegation. I could have just done that if I didn't know how to do it, right? But another thing I can use it for is I can use it to help me word things. So I'll say, make this as succinct and professional as possible. And then I'll say Cyberhawks used IMPACT to create to prove that anyone in the domain can create a machine account. And then in this case, maybe this is not the best description, but like Cyberhawks demonstrated that anyone in the domain can create a machine account using IMPACT. As you can see, like you can use these tools to kind of help you as you're reporting. But I have a specific I like to standardize the way that I write up these proof of exploitation. So I follow a standard format, which is using blank, Cyberhawks, validated or observed blank. So I'm trying to like match this format. So I can say using in packets at computer, Cyberhawks validated. I could say validated that low privilege domain accounts could create new machine accounts in the CPTC.local domain, right? Something like that. Cool. Then, of course, I promise this is the last one that I'll like write up this thoroughly, but I just kind of wanted to show you like this is what reporting actually looks like on the job in the real world. Boom. We're going to call out this successfully added machine account. Of course, I have to say, in this case, we're using bash. So I can say bash or just sh for shell. And I accidentally got rid of one of those. And I always forget what this is called for whatever reason. Highlight manual. Boom. Okay, so we redacted. The next thing I want to do is, yes, I proved myself abusing it, but I want to give the client an easy way to check for this vulnerability without having to actually abuse it, right? Without having to create a new computer account using Impacket. So in order to do that, it might be good to come up with an AD PowerShell query that they could use to prove that domain users can create machine accounts. So let's say I go to ChatGPT and I say, give me an AD PowerShell command to check the MSDS machine account quota for a domain. Boom. Get AD domain.msds machine account quota. I actually think this is wrong. At least I use one that's longer. So if this is right, that would be really cool because maybe I'll use this from now on. But we're about to find out. Also, I did not copy and paste that. Copy. And then let me make sure my clipboard is good to go. Shared clipboard, bidirectional. Copy. And paste that there. And again, remember, we have to explicitly specify the server since we're not domain joined. DC1. And it's not actually, it didn't recognize it, so this is an example of where ChatGPT makes a mistake. But I can give it some helpful tips like use get AD object, which is what I normally do. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, I accidentally put user instead of use. No. Sad. Okay. There we go. This looks correct to me. Okay. So I'm going to copy this. Paste it here. Just for consistency's sake, I'll change this to select. And we're going to have to, again, specify the server in two places now, because initially it's running get AD domain here, so it needs to know where to get that from. And then here it's running get AD object. Both of these reach out to a domain controller, so I'm going to have to specify that domain controller in both places, right? Now this, I believe, should work. And it's taking its merry time, but eventually it'll come back with 10 for us, hopefully.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Are we specifying DC1 because there are two domain controls, or if we don't specify anything else?
So you can specify either one. It doesn't matter. I could have specified DC2. Oh my gosh. Probably just MSDS. Please. I hate that some things, I don't understand why in Windows some things are like MS-DS and other things are just like MSDS. It doesn't make sense to me. But hopefully that's the issue here. Anyway. Yeah, but so as you can see, now we have the machine account quota. You can see it's 10. And so that means that low privilege domain users can join up to 10 machines to the domain. So I'm going to take that And I'm going to include that here as step 1. So I'm going to make this step 2. And I'm going to make this step 1. Also, it just deleted it for me, which is annoying, but that's okay. Oh my gosh. Why are you being a problem? Okay. And then here I'll say, using PowerShell's Active Directory module, Cyberhawks observed the MSDS machine account quota was greater than 0. I'm going to grab this, draw attention to that 10 right there. And this is PowerShell. I don't know why this is always confusing for me, but it's highlight manual. There we go. And because these are commands, boom, and boom. Cool. So as you can see, now we have something that when the client sees this, it's really clear. Like here we're proving that you can do it, and here we're actually doing it, right? And then if they want to replicate this in their environment, if they want to be like, okay, let me double check if I fixed it, right? They can just copy and paste this command directly from the report, and they can run it, and they can get back that 10, and they can be like, oh, we didn't fix it, right? So it makes it really nice and easy for the client. The last thing that we're going to do is they may not know what InPacket is. So why don't we, for tools where they might not know what it is, we're going to say InPacket, and we're going to provide a link to InPacket on GitHub. So if I say GitHub, InPacket, I believe it's by Fortra. Boom. Boom. Now they fully understand what is InPacket. Well, now they have a link to it down there. I believe in Sysraptor you can also do like this. I'm forgetting how to do links, but you can actually make it a link. Maybe it's like Discord, or yeah. So there, now it's actually a clickable link. So if you send them a PDF copy of the report, they'll actually be able to click on that. It can go right there. Okay. So that's as much as I'm going to show of like report writing, because I don't want to like spend way too much time on this. But this is how reports are professionally written. Like this is the process you go through. And the rest of this finding is templated out, so I don't have to make any changes to it, right? So this is where the importance of making those templates comes in, because if you don't make those templates, then for the actual report, you're going to have to go back in and fill in all these sections. But if the templates are done, you just import the template, and then all you have to do is fill out this proof of exploitation. Make sense? Okay, cool. Anyway, going back here, now that we created our machine account, we can use it. So, okay, first thing that we have to do is we have to set that MSDS allowed to act on behalf of authority property on the target, right? The reason we do that is that defines resource-based constrained delegation, so then we can use our machine account to perform the resource-based constrained delegation. So in order to do that, we have get. So we'll just do get AD computer for now. I'll show you why in a second. Server, and then our target, which is PC2. And then we'll just do properties all, and we'll do member to figure out what we're looking for here. Oh, silly me. Server is supposed to be DC1. There we go. Cool. And then from here, we can look for the one that I'm looking for. I know because I've done this before, but you can look it up if you didn't. Principals allowed to delegate to account. So really the underlying like property is called MSDS allowed to act on behalf of other identity, but that's a mouthful. But in AD PowerShell, they make it a little easier. They give you this principals allowed to delegate to account. So let's see what it's currently set to. So we'll just print that out. we have to see what it's set to first, because if we make changes, we're going to have to set it back to what it was originally set to, right? Any change we make to the environment, we have to reset it. Fortunately, here there are no other principals that are allowed that are not configured for resource-based constraint delegation, so we're safe to make our change and then clear it afterwards. So to make that change, surprise, surprise, instead of get AD computer, we're going to say set AD computer. And then instead of this properties here, to pull out the specific property, we're just going to do dash, principals allowed to delegate to account. And then we have to specify what account we want to give that permission to, which has to be an account with an SPN, or in other words, a service account, or in other words, that CyberHawks account that we created. So we'll say CyberHawks. Boom. And once that's done, we didn't receive any output, but we can check this again by running that command that I ran before. I just used the up arrow twice, and then I pressed enter. And now you'll notice that we have CyberHawks computer CPTC local. In Active Directory, there are kind of two ways, maybe more than two, but like two primary ways of naming things. You can use the SAM account name, or you can use the the distinguished name, this is called. So this fully written out name is basically the same thing as this. It's just another way of referring to that account. But the nice thing about the distinguished name is it has the container that object is located in. So you can directly see that CyberHawks is located in computers, which is located in CPTC, which is located in local. Technically, okay, CPTC local is a domain, but you know, right? Okay, so now that the CyberHawks account has that, we should be able to use it to do resource-based constraint delegation because we configured it here. So I'm going to start a new session here as the CyberHawks account. And cool, now we're hopefully running as the CyberHawks account. And now to do resource-based constraint delegation, I'm going to use Rubius. So I'll say rubius.exe, and then S4U, we're getting service for user on behalf of a user. And then domain is going to be cptc.local. The DC is going to be DC1. Actually, I don't think I even had to okay, I didn't even have to do that. I could have just run it here. I forgot that this is the way Rubius wants you to do it. If you actually look at the help screen for this command, it tells you, I'll just rewrite it. It tells you that it wants you to actually explicitly specify the user and the hash for the user in the command if you're going to do it that way. So the first thing I actually have to do is I have to go Rubius, I think it's hash, and then the username is CyberHawks, and the password is, and this is just going to give me it's going to calculate for me the NTLM hash, or the NT hash, I should say, for that account, so that I can use it in this next command that requires that hash. Now we can do S4U, domain, cptc.local, DC, DC1, user is CyberHawks, and now we specify the hash with RC4, so I'll copy that from here. And then what do we actually want to get a ticket for? So, or actually the user we want to impersonate, so impersonate user. At this point, you want to specify a user that you know is a local admin on that machine, so then you can gain access to that machine, right? But domain admins are local admins by default on every machine, so we can just use a domain admin. And to ensure that we're getting a domain admin, we can go back to Bloodhound. We can say domain admins. We can see who is a member of domain admin. And we see we have this administrator account, so I'm just going to choose this administrator account. We have to make sure it's enabled. So I'm going to go here and make sure that account is enabled. Cool. We'll use that one. administrator, MSDS SPN is going to let us specify what ticket we actually want to grab. So the ticket we want to grab is, let's do CIFS. So CIFS is traditionally used for doing like LS or interacting with SMB. There are other tickets you could use. It doesn't matter. Yes, correct. CIFS. And then we're going to say PC2. Just make sure that whatever you put here is how you refer to that machine later, because it does matter whether you put PC2 or pc2.cptc.local. It doesn't matter which one you do here, as long as it's consistent across your future commands, right? Okay, cool. And then we're just going to save it. Out file, and we'll call it ticket.ccache. Sorry, Kirby. Rubius uses the Kirby format. Okay. Person and user, MCSSPN, out file. I think I remembered everything. We're going to see if it works. And it worked. And we have a ticket. Now, another thing I could have done is I could have done PTT, pass the ticket to import it into the current session. And now if I do klist, we see that ticket there for administrator, but specifically to CIFS on PC2. And so now what we can do with that, remember, it gives you basically full, CIFS is the ticket for SMB. So we can list files in a share that's normally not accessible on PC2. So a default share that's present on all Windows machines is like $, which shows you basically the C drive, right? So if I try to run that now, because I have that ticket cached, we can now list those files. I should also be able to run admin, I think, hopefully, yes. So I can actually get the contents of, I believe it's C Windows System 32 is what that admin drive points to. Questions so far?
Instead of CIFS, can we look out for TGT?
So the way resource-based constraint delegation works, you can't get a TGT for administrator, right? You can only request service tickets to that other service on behalf of administrator. So you can only request service tickets. So you have to choose service tickets that work. But you can choose whatever service ticket you want. So I could have made this an LDAP service ticket, right? Another thing you can do with Rubius specifically is you can say alt service, and then CIFS, LDAP, host, and then that'll grab all those tickets. So that's something you can just do with Rubius. And now if I look at what's imported, I have CIFS ticket, LDAP ticket, and host ticket. What that alt service does is it actually takes that ticket that it got and it just replaces, because you don't have to query the domain controller to modify this part of it, right? Like we talked about that day that we talked about it. You can't modify this part of it, but you can modify this part of it without any issues. So that's what that does.
So now basically we used CyberHawk's machine account to access PC2 using Rubius.
Yes. So if we go back to when we had that discussion on resource-based constraint delegation, which I'm going to go to the board for, we had database, remember? Database. We had web. And we had user. And the whole purpose of resource-based constraint delegation is we say the database is special, so it can be delegated to by web. And then what web does is it will request service tickets on behalf of user to the database. Make sense? So that is what resource-based constraint delegation is. In this scenario, database is the machine that we're trying to move to. So PC2. It's not actually a database, but that's what it's kind of being in the scenario, right? Web has to be some account, some service account, right? Because it doesn't make sense for this to be a normal account. It has to be a service account. So that's why we created a machine account. And by default, machine accounts are service accounts in Active Directory. They have an SPN, or service principal name. So in this case, web is CyberHawk's. And And user in this case is administrator. So what that Rubius command did is service for user, so the Cyberhawks account requested a service ticket on behalf of administrator to PC2. But it cannot request TGTs, it can only request service tickets. Make sense? If you can understand this conceptually, don't worry about the commands. I know you're probably looking at this like, oh my god, how am I going to remember all this? The commands are written out for you. You can find them either via ChatGPT or you can go on the hacker recipes. What you need to understand is the concept. If you can understand the concept, you'll find the commands and run them and it'll work, right? Question?
Okay, so because MSDS machine account quota is greater than 0, we're able to create
this machine account in the first place. So initially, okay, walking it back a little bit, let's do this.
Okay.
I will answer your question in a second, but this might actually answer it. Maybe. Okay, so initially we had access to our Pi, right? And our Pi could modify the attributes of PC2. That's where this whole vulnerability came from, right? So we're like, okay, well, we can modify the attributes of PC2, but how are we going to actually compromise PC2, right? And so we're like, okay, why don't we set up this scenario for ourselves? So in order to set up this scenario, we can modify that attribute on PC2 to grant any machine account resource-based constrained delegation. From there, we perform the resource-based constrained delegation. However, before we did that, in order to grant ourselves, the ability to do that, we needed a service account. So, using RPi, we created Cyberhawks. Right? That provided that machine account. Then we modified this attribute here so that Cyberhawks has control over PC2. Maybe not control, but can request service tickets to PC2, right? Then we carried out the attack. The only reason we could create this machine account in the first place is because that MSDS machine account quota was greater than 0. If it was 0, we would not be able to create a machine account as a low privileged domain user. At that point, we would have a couple other options. Option 1 is to try to compromise a different computer. If we're able, RPi is very likely in a real-world environment, they're very likely in local admin somewhere, right? So I would spray this credential across all the machines using that exec, across all the machines in the domain, and I would see one that says pwned, right? At that point, I can jump on that machine, and I can have it off, and I can dump the tickets from that machine and grab the ticket granting ticket for that machine, and then I own that machine account. Long process that I don't want to try to teach. Also might not work if they have like EDR or antivirus on that machine. If I try to dump tickets, I might have to like launch into a more red team scenario. There are other things you can do to get a machine account is the point. But the easiest way is if that MSDS machine account quota is greater than 0, you can directly create a new machine account. Make sense? This is why doing those templates will be so helpful to you, because as you go through the templates, you're going to learn. You're going to be like, oh, you can do this. And the way that penetration testing works is I'm not following a set procedure. I do have like a checklist of things that I want to check, right? But I know how these things work, and because I know how these things work, I can think creatively and think of ways to abuse them. So this is an example of I know how RBCD works, I know what the MSDS machine account quota is, and so I know all of what I need to know in order to be able to abuse this. Question? Did I answer it?
Yes, but just like a little clarification. So the criticality on RBCD would not depend on the quota.
No. So what are the actual findings here? Let's talk about that. Resource-based constrained delegation, that's not a finding. Why? Because we configured that as the attacker. That wasn't configured in the first place. So that's not a finding. That wasn't wrong in the environment, right? The thing that was wrong in the environment that let us configure that was the excessive privileges that RPi had to PC2. So that's going to be a finding. that I called excessive privileges on domain object ACL, right? PC2 is a domain object. ACL is privileges, right? Excessive privileges for PC2. That's one vulnerability. The second vulnerability is that MSDS machine account quota. We needed both of those for this to work. They are independent of each other, and they are both vulnerabilities in and of themselves, but we used them together to perform this attack.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
But RBCD, resource-based constraint delegation, is not a finding because we configured that, right? We abused these privileges to configure that. That wasn't in the environment in the first place.
Okay. Because on that template, there's resource-based constraint delegation as low. So I was thinking like,
Yeah.
if those two vulnerabilities are there, would that become medium? There, obviously, or
So that's a very good question. First of all, if the reason that it is included as a low is if this was configured like this in the first place, then it's also a vulnerability, right? But do we change the severity of findings based on them working together? The way that I have seen this approached is no. The severity of the findings, each finding is considered a standalone finding. Why? Okay, let's say you remediated, let's say you fixed resource-based constraint, or sorry, let's say you fixed this ACL, right? There are other things I could do with that MSDS machine account quota, and they're not influenced by, this ACL thing, right? So it would be confusing to say, okay, this is a high because this worked, and then the client fixes it, and then you're like, okay, well now that finding is a medium. Like that just makes it confusing, right? It's easiest to say this finding by itself is a medium. That's why we have, in the report, we have an attack path section or an attack summary section. And this is what makes some consultancies stand out over others. So some consultancies will just give you that list of findings, but I don't think that's very helpful personally, because how do you know how these play together? But that's where you would have an attack path where you'd say we used this and we used this to compromise. And then when you're recommending the client to fix things, you would say start by looking at our attack path, focus on those first, and then look at findings that are high severity. Does that make sense?
Yes. And then like the medium vulnerabilities and lower ones, their criticality, once those higher ones are fixed, they would
stay the same.
Okay.
Doesn't change. Severity doesn't change at all. It stays the same. Right, because like otherwise it's like they fixed one thing. Okay, how do you? And it might even be difficult to evaluate the extent of impact of MSDS machine account quota. Like for example, there are other attacks that you would need a computer account to perform. For example, let's say resource-based constraint delegation was already configured somewhere. You would need a computer account to abuse it. Sorry, that's a bad example because it would be configured for an already existing computer account. I'm trying to think of a good example where this would also be used. You could do the same thing. Okay, we didn't talk about this yet, but let's say you're relaying NTLM v1 hashes, right? So you do like a DC to DC relay to compromise the domain. We haven't talked about that yet, but that's another example of where if you're using RBCD to do that, which you can, you're again going to need that machine account quota. So because there's that, there's this, there's like an infinite number of possibilities of things you can do with this. It's kind of hard also to evaluate like how should I assign the severity based on like all the different things you can do with it, right? So we want things that are methodical and procedural. If the client comes to us and they're like, you have to give me solid reasoning for why you assign the severity, you have to be able to say, okay, well, this is what constitutes a medium. What constitutes a medium is something that cannot be used on its own to gain access, but in tandem with other similar level vulnerabilities can use to gain access. Then you can explicitly define what is a medium, right? Okay, yeah, anyway, gone on that point way too long. The point is we do not change the severity. Severity always stays the same. Okay. Now, this is great and all. We have this ticket. How do we actually use this ticket to then get on the machine? Well, now this goes into lateral movement techniques, and I'm not going to teach lateral movement techniques, but all I'm going to say is if you have impacket, you have a ton of them to choose from. Anything that ends in exec.py in the impacket is like gain access to the machine via some method.
And then slash PTT, deposit ticket to gain access.
You're thinking about Rubius. But we will use the ticket. Yes, you are correct. We will use the ticket. We'll just have to use it a little differently with impacket works a little differently than Rubius. But yes, you're on the right track. We will take this ticket, we'll pass this ticket, and we'll use it. So you might have heard of PS exec, WMI exec, decom exec, add exec. The one I'm going to use is SMB exec. Why? Because I know for sure SMB uses CIFS, right? So we have a CIFS ticket. Why not use SMB exec? Cool. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to transfer that ticket over to my Kali machine. This is why I love using MOBA Xterm, because I could just go like this. Let's make sure I'm in the right directory, though. I am in shared workspace. If I go to shared workspace, I'm going to upload. Upload that ticket. Now we have to convert that ticket into a format that there are two ticket formats. I did mention this last week, but Rubius uses Kirby format and Impacket and Linux tools prefer Ccache format. So we're going to have to convert this ticket, which is right here, to Ccache format. So we can say ticket converter, which is another Impacket tool. Ticket, and I'll just call it ticket.ccache. Boom, converted. Now we have ticket.ccache. Now to actually use it in Impacket, you have to export this, what's it called? Environment variable. You have to create this environment variable called krb5cc name. Yes. Equals, and then the path to this ticket. In this case, it's in my current directory, so I can just say ticket.ccache. And then from there, we can do smb exec.py. I'm just going to do -h to see all my options to remind myself. As you can see, all of these Impacket tools use the exact same format to do everything, which is nice. Because you know one, you know them all. smb exec.py. So the user is, in this case, administrator. And I should specify the domain, because I almost forgot, cptc.local/administrator. We're not going to specify a password because we don't have a password. We're using a ticket. Instead, I'm going to say @ and then my target, which is PC2, I think. And then -k tells it to use Kerberos. And so it's going to grab that ticket from that krb5cc name environment variable. And then since we don't want to specify a password, we have to use no pass. Otherwise, it'll prompt us for a password. Hopefully this works. Keeping our fingers crossed. And it might take some time, but ideally, we have a shell now on the target. So we have gained access. And, okay, well, this is nice and all. I have like a command line terminal. What if I want to actually RDP into that machine? Well, guess what I can do? I can create a new local user and give them RDP privileges. So I can say net
add them to the local
user. Yes, exactly. I will add them to two groups. I'll add them to administrators and remote desktop users. Yes. So net user, and I'll say Cyberhawks. Why? Because we want to make it clear that this is us. And then the password. Add. I hope I got this right. I'm just kind of like doing it with no prior practice. It's taking forever, but in theory, this would work. It's just, I don't know why it's being super slow. That's annoying. I wonder if it added it and my shell just died, which sometimes happens. This is what you have to deal with, which is very annoying. The share access flags are incompatible. What? Okay, that's really strange. Anyway, point is, maybe if I were more patient, that would have worked. And then we'd have RDP access. I don't know why I'm getting a sharing violation now. I might have to like generate a new ticket and try again.
Maybe can we use PSexec now?
Maybe I can use PSexec. Let's see. I don't know what tickets it needs, but hopefully it just needs a CIFS ticket. Cool. Good call. Good call. PSexec it is. Also keep in mind whether or not these work does depend on what kind of antivirus or EDR that they have on their machine. You're very safe doing Active Directory attacks. You're very safe doing that. You're very safe using Evil WinRM, because WinRM is a default thing that's normally used in environments. You're safe using RDP. You're not as safe using the exec.py tools because EDR or antivirus may look for those because it's a very non-standard thing to do. It just depends. That's why you try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Anyway.
And there is one more thing called WMI. What is
there is WMI exec. Although I think that's going to require a different service ticket. I don't know what service tickets WMI requires by default, but we could try it. Anyway, I'm not going to, for this interest of time, I'm not going to do it. But yes, you're right. The next thing I could try is I could figure out like what service ticket does WMI use? That does not help. DCOM, is that a service ticket? WS man, HTTP, LDAP. Come on, ChatGPT, give me some good answers today. Oh my gosh, why can't you give me a straightforward answer? Try that. Okay, I guess it is a main pro. Okay, I guess it is a DCOM ticket. I didn't even know that was a thing because I guess I just never use it. But yeah, I learned something today. You learn something new every day in this field, I tell you. Let's see. DCOM? Yeah, that's a thing. Okay, use the DCOM ticket. Guess we know now. Yeah, DCOM. It is a valid ticket. So yeah, then I would export that ticket, transfer that over, and then we could try that with WMI exec. We could do that. I am so low on time because, as usual, I totally underestimated the amount of time it would take for me to explain all this stuff. So I'm not going to do that. Point is, there's a second way. How about this? We used RBCD. That's one way of getting on the machine. What's another way? We can use shadow credentials. So why don't we try using shadow credentials? Shadow credentials is a lot easier. I want to show you RBCD, so you have a couple different methods, but if you remember, the initial vulnerability we were looking at, we had generic write over a computer. We could also use shadow credentials. So for that, you just use Whisker. So I have to be, first of all, if you ever want to remove your tickets from your current session, like you're done working with them, you don't need them anymore, klist purge removes them. So now all the tickets are gone. And now we're instead going to use Whisker. And domain, cptc.local, DC, DC1, and then target, and our target in this case is PC2. And then what do we want to do with this? First, we're going to list to see if there are any existing credentials. So, oh, sorry, not PC dollars, PC2. Yeah, it's going to fail, but that's okay. The first thing we want to do is we want to check, because remember, if you remember shadow credentials, we modify that MSDS key credential link property with a certificate that we create, right? So the first thing we want to do is see if that property is already populated, because if it is, we want to make sure that when we then go back to clean up the environment and remove this later, that we're removing the correct thing. Also, another thing I like to do that I haven't been doing, but I would normally do it on an engagement, is I can go back to my report and I can go to notes and I can add a little note here and I'll just call it cleanup and I'll say remove Cyberhawk's domain account and then like check for Cyberhawk's local account on PC2 in case it did accidentally create it, which is quite possible. And then I'll say remove key credential on PC2, right? Just so that I have all the changes I made here in one spot. Oh, and remove RBCD, right? Remove RBCD for Cyberhawks on PC2. And actually, the way I like to do a lot of these things that I think is pretty easy. Sorry, I kind of took a detour here, but you can use MMC, and if you run it in a session that's running as that user, it'll be running as that user. MMC lets you basically access all of those Active Directory things that I showed you in last time's demo, but from a different machine, right? You don't have to be on a domain controller. So from here, I can say File, add or remove snap-in, and then, for example, let's say I want Active Directory users and computers. That's an option here. I can add that, boom, right-click, change the domain, so I can tell it's cptc.local, boom, and now it might take a little while to load it up, but hopefully it'll load it up. And then from there, we see cptc.local, and I have that same view that I had on the domain controller itself, so I see what the actual network person would see. But then from there, I can delete stuff here, right? And it's like a graphical interface, which is a little easier than like using PowerShell commands, right? And actually, I don't think a user has privileges to remove a computer account that they created, but we're about to find out, because if anything, this just won't work. Yeah, okay, we don't have privileges. But if I ran this as an admin, which is what I would do if I compromise the domain, then I would just delete that computer account like that.
Can we use MMC to,
configure RB? Yes, you can. That is a good point. So if I went to domain, I think it's under PCs. If I right-click Properties, and then Delegation. I think this is regular constrained delegation. So another thing to know is if you go to View, you can say Advanced Features, and then that shows a lot more than the regular view shows. So this might be an advanced feature. So if I go here, this is going to be an attribute, I believe, and it's going to be MSDS allowed to act on behalf of other identity, which is right here. The problem with this, in this case, is it's in a really weird format that is difficult to work with. Like, sure, I can edit this, or it doesn't even let me edit it. It says there's no editor registered to handle this attribute type. So in some cases, yeah, you can use MMC. Why not? In other cases, like actually I could have used MMC to create that machine account if I really wanted to. That's something I could have done. But yeah, but the reason I prefer commands is because it's easier to write up. If you're using MMC, then this is what I would have to say. I use Greenshot as my screenshotting tool. So I have it aliased to my F1 key. Then I'd have to take a screenshot of this, use a box to like show what I did. Like I went to File and I went to, you would have to write it up step by step, which would take so long to write up. Okay, I ran MMC. Okay, then I clicked on File. Then I clicked on Add Remove Snap-in. Then I clicked to add this. Then I clicked OK. Then I right-clicked on the domain to choose the domain. Then I typed in cptc.local, clicked OK. Like, do you want to explain all that, or do you want to just say I ran this AD PowerShell command? So, to be fair, another point that I want to make is when you actually write up these proof of exploitation, a lot of the times that won't be the way you actually did it. It'll just be an easier way of writing it up. So all these 80 PowerShell commands that I'm doing, yes, I could do all these 80 PowerShell commands, but this would take forever when I could just run a tool like Pingcastle that's going to pull a lot of this data down for me. I actually don't think it does constrained and unconstrained delegation. I could be wrong about that. But a lot of the other ones, it'll be in the ping castle report. So I actually ran this in advance so I could kind of show you what it looks like without having to wait for it to run. So this is a ping castle report. And then on each of these, it tells you a bunch of vulnerabilities. Like, look, there's a Windows 7 machine. So if I were actually to write up that vulnerability, I would use an 80 PowerShell command that searches for Windows 7 operating systems. But the way I found that is running ping castle, right? Same thing with Bloodhound. If I see an ACL abuse on Bloodhound, I'm actually going to write that up using 80 PowerShell in the end. But I'm going to find it in Bloodhound. That's just to make it easier on the client and also easier to write up. Cool. Anyway, what were we doing? Yes, we were using Whisker. Sorry, I keep taking detours, but hopefully you're learning something from this. Okay, so see how there are no entries, so we don't have to worry about like which one are we deleting later on. Then we just use Whisker and we say add. Whisker makes it so easy. It just handles all the hard stuff for you, and you just say Whisker list and Whisker add. Boom, done. See, now it's generating the certificate and generating key credential, and then it's going to say adding key credential. I don't know why it's taking forever. There you go. And guess what is so nice about it? It even gives you the Rubius command that you have to run to then use that key credential to get a TGT. So now using this command, remember with key credentials, you can also actually request the NTLM hash for the user. So that's what we're doing here in Rubius. When we say get credentials, we're requesting the hash. You can't do that with a normal TGT, right? But if you're using a certificate and authenticating through a key credential, you can actually request their NTLM hash. So we got a TGT, and here we actually have that computer accounts, that machine accounts NTLM hash. This on its own is not very helpful because just because we have the machine account information doesn't mean like we can't just log in with the machine account, right? So if we wanted to actually get on that machine, we'd have to do what we talked about last time, which is an S4U2 self, which is where we request a service ticket on behalf of administrator to the machine itself, right? And again, that's also using Rubius S4U with the /self flag.
Is it stealthier than pass the hash rather than adding the password, which is more stealthier?
Are you saying is it stealthier to request a ticket rather than to request the NTLM hash?
Yes.
I actually don't know the answer to that. I would say they're probably equally as not stealthy. If the client has really good monitoring in place, they will catch something weird like this. They will catch just the fact that you added that key credential in the first place. However, most environments don't have that good monitoring. And actually, I did shadow credentials in a red team engagement so here's the thing. Most companies, they will use EDR or antivirus. What EDR and antivirus does is it looks at logs on individual machines, right? It does not look at network style attacks, which is why all these things work, right? So that's why I said SMB exec and ad exec and PS exec, they might not work because they're interacting directly with a machine, which may get caught by antivirus. But most companies don't have any additional monitoring of their network itself, aside from monitoring those endpoints. So that's why a lot of times things like this are not caught. But if they do catch it, either way, it's not going to be stealthy, right? I don't think it makes that big a difference. But the point is, I did this on a red team engagement because we knew that the client, we talked with them beforehand, they had they were using Rapid7 IDR and CrowdStrike for their endpoints, but they weren't monitoring for Active Directory attacks like this. Anyway, point is, then I would do an S4U2 self, but we don't even have to do that here because what is our end goal? Our end goal is getting onto server, which has unconstrained delegation, then getting onto the domain controller, right? So now that we have the machine account here, we can use that machine account to then perform constrained delegation to gain access to the server machine account, right? We don't have to actually gain access to the machine itself. The reason if we did RBCD, we'd have to gain access to the machine itself is because we didn't have the machine account hash, right? and we needed that. So then we'd have to go on the machine. We'd have to auth back to ourselves with the machine and grab the machine account. I know that's very confusing, but if you understand the concepts and you think critically about how you can abuse them, that's what you get. Question.
So server has an unconstrained delegation.
Yeah, so remember when we initially wrote it up? We have that PC2 has constrained delegation to server, right? Now server had unconstrained delegation, right? And since server has unconstrained delegation, if we're able to get on server, we can dump the tickets, and for anybody who authed to that server, we can dump the TGTs and then impersonate them, right?
Yes.
So our goal here is to get on server, and then we'll do an attack that I was supposed to cover today, but I don't even know if I'll get there, which is forced authentication. We'll force the domain controller to auth to server. We'll grab server's TGT, and then we'll have the TGT. Sorry, we'll grab the domain controller's TGT off the server, and then we'll have the domain controller's TGT, which we can use to DC sync.
To get TGT, we need domain controller to access server. To get the TGT.
Yes. To get the TGT, the domain controller has to authenticate to the server, but there's a class of vulnerabilities known as forced auth vulnerabilities, or coercion, sometimes it's called, that lets you force machines to authenticate to other machines. Anyway. Oh man, I'm already over time. This is so bad. Okay. I'll go like 10 minutes longer, if that's okay. If anybody needs to leave, you can leave. That's fine. I understand. So let's say we grab this. We're going to say rubius.exe. Right now we're abusing constrained delegation. Again, we want to get a service. We want to do an S4U. So we want to grab a service ticket on behalf of a user, right? And this is going to be very similar to RBCD. So domain cptc.local DC, DC1. And then we have, I'm blanking, user, in this case is going to be PC2. And RC4 is going to be this. Now be careful, because with constrained delegation, there are very specific service tickets that you can request. You can't just request any service ticket you want, right? So we have to request one of the service tickets that we observed here in this configuration. So if we go back to that command we ran before, we can specifically request CIFS service tickets, right? So we have to make sure that that's what we request. But remember, we can use that /alt service to change this part of it, right? So although we can request a CIFS, we can modify that to be anything we want. We just have to initially request a CIFS ticket. So I'm just going to grab this one. In this case, CIFS is kind of what we want for testing this out. But if this was LDAP, I could also say alt service CIFS. So going here, MSDSSPN. There you go. And then we'd say alt service, and we'd specify, I can just show that as an example. CIFS, LDAP, DCOM, just for fun, host, HTTP, why not? Get a bunch of them. It doesn't really matter. And then we can either pass the ticket or we can save it. I think we can actually do both. So I'll both pass the ticket and I'll save it to a file called ticket.gerby. Yay. And we'll hope that works. Oh, and I also have to say the user that we're impersonating, right? Because if we don't say which user we're impersonating, that's not going to do anything. So impersonate. Again, administrator. Boom. Okay, list. We have all those tickets in there. So now, if I ls server $, boom. Beautiful. We have access to server. And now I really would like to get on server. So trying to think of a good way. Okay, here's what we're going to do. And hopefully it saved those tickets too. Yes, it did. We're going to use SMB exec, but this time I'm not going to try to create a new user because that didn't work last time. Or maybe I want to try a different one. Why don't we try WMI exec? Why not? We'll see if it works, right? We know it's a decom ticket. So upload, decom, ticket converter, decom, sorry, Ccache. Oh, I just did that. I'm set up. Export. There we go. Ticket2.ccache. Again, if you want to know how it's used, -h, but it's going to be used the exact same way because they're all the same. Administrator at server dash k dash no pass. Cool. Okay. I'm dumb. This is not PowerShell. This is command prompt. Okay. So do I dare try to add a local user? Do I try it? Let's try it. Net user. I don't know why it's having so much trouble adding a user. Oh, sad. That's really strange. I should have not done that. I should have just tried launching a PowerShell session, which would have been fine because we're admin, so it doesn't really matter. But let's try this. Let's grab sifs. Although this one might let me re-auth. Yeah, it does. Okay, cool. Chillin'. We'll try to, so this is the question. Okay, sweet. So normally, okay, in order to abuse this, I don't know if I want to go through the whole thing, but it is written out for you in that template if you wanted to take a look. Point is, in Windows, when you run a command prompt session, by default, it does not run it with full administrator privileges, even if you are an admin. For example, actually this is a terrible example because this machine is just configured with I'm using the administrator account. But if I were using a low privilege user, actually I can show that here. Let's go back to RPi here. If I start CMD, you'll notice that it starts me in the user's home directory. And so if I see what privileges I have, with whoami/priv, oh my gosh, that is painfully slow. You'll notice that we only have a few privileges. Also, don't pay attention to this state, because that state can be enabled or disabled at will. It doesn't matter. Just pay attention to which privileges show up. So if I actually wanted to run command prompt privileged, I would have to right click, which I'm sure you guys have done this before, and select run as administrator. And that would run it in a privileged context. And then you'd see all those privileges that we saw before. That is something to keep in mind. That is known as UAC, or user account control. And the whole purpose of that is so if an attacker logs in, for example, with already, I'm trying to think of a good example. There are certain cases where you're going to log in and you're going to have limited privileges. I think EvilWinRM, depending what account you log in with, you might not have full administrator privileges. I could be wrong, but I think that's the case. So that's why I always check before I try doing privileged things. You have to check with whoami/priv. But in this case, the way that some of these tools have just the way that they work it will automatically spawn a privileged session, or maybe they have a UAC bypass, it's called, built in. So WMyExec, apparently, it just works, so you don't have to worry about it. Now the real question is, can I start a PowerShell session? This might not work. If it doesn't work, womp. Sad, big sad.
Can we change the process? Maybe then run PowerShell.
I mean, I could. Okay, if this were like OSCP style, which I could actually do here. How much do I want to do this? Yes, I'm going to use run as, but I'm going to use a special run as GitHub repo called run as CS. And the reason I would use that as opposed to regular run as is because run as requires you to enter a password in an interactive prompt. The whole reason that it requires you to enter a password in an interactive prompt is so you can't do it here, right? Because you don't have a real interactive prompt here. But run as CS is a C# tool that somebody wrote that I could upload, then do run as CS, and then get a session back to get like a authenticate that way. Do I really want to do that? Not necessarily. Let's say net user. Let's see if I can at least list users. Okay, I can list users. I just apparently can't create them for whatever reason. In this case, I think I actually have antivirus disabled, so I probably could just upload Rubius. But in the real world, you wouldn't be able to do that. But I should be able to just upload Rubius, so we can do that. So if I upload Rubius, I was going to try to show you like the way I normally do it on actual engagements where I reflectively load it in PowerShell because it's cool. And you never have to touch the disk that way, which is nice, but it's not working. So this is fine. We'll just do this. We'll say copy, because remember we have that ticket in there. We have that sys ticket. So I can just say copy rubius.exe server $, or $? Yes, I'm crazy. C $. Network name cannot be found. I don't know why I put the $sign there. Sorry guys, I'm tired. Okay, file copied. Now, if I go back here, we have Rubius there, so now we can use it. Hopefully, if it doesn't crash on me. So if I do rubius.exe dump, I think triage. Oh, okay, it worked. And here we have a list of all of the cached Kerberos tickets in this machine. So actually, in this case, we don't even have to do anything special because we have a ticket here for administrator. And hopefully, we have a TGT. This output is unfortunately not very pretty, so it's not really telling me. Do we have KRB TGT for administrator? I feel like we should. No, we don't. That actually might be our ticket from our auth here. But we have SQL SVC. That could be interesting. Anyway, point is, what I would actually do in the end is I would say rubius.exe. And do I actually remember this command off the top of my head? Absolutely not. So I'm going to go to our template there. Unconstrained delegation, which is a high. Or actually, I think I made it medium. I made it medium. Yes, I did. Okay. We're going to monitor tickets here. And I'm going to try to save it to a file. And hopefully, even though we'll probably lose command line, it doesn't matter because it'll continue monitoring it and just saving it to the file, and then we can log back in and see the results. Hopefully. No promises. And it's going to run for 20 seconds. And now I'm going to do what I mentioned before, that forced authentication. So now we get a taste of what I wanted to talk about today. But there are some tools that allow you to perform forced authentication. So you force one machine to authenticate to another, basically. And one such tool is Petit Totem. So you might have heard of, well, maybe you didn't, but a big one that a lot of people use is Coercer. Coercer does this for a bunch of different methods. but I like using the original tool itself because I think that's easier for a client to understand, to be like, this tool addresses this vulnerability, this coercion method, right? Whereas coercer is just like, well, we tried like 5 different coercion methods and this one happened to work. It's a little more confusing when you're writing it up. So petit totem, you do have to have user account credentials, which we do. That's not entirely true if it's misconfigured. You might not even have to have user account credentials, which makes this a critical vulnerability. But in this case, I believe we have credentials, so we'll use them. And then where I want it to auth to, and then where I want it to auth from. So we'll just do DC1. And I have no idea if this is going to work, but we're going to hope that this works. So I'm going to run this. I'm going to lose my session, but that's fine. We're going to run the auth. We got the auth. Attack worked. And now we'll wait a little bit for this to finish, hopefully. I think we lost our session, but hopefully when we log back in, we'll see an out.txt file, and that'll contain the TGT that we're looking for. Oh, it worked. Look at that. That's amazing. Oh my God, I keep doing that. Sorry, I keep assuming I'm in PowerShell. So now if I type out.txt, cool. We have a TGT for DC1 for the domain controller. If we have the TGT for a domain controller, what can we do? We can DC sync, because a DC sync is a legitimate thing where a domain controller requests replication from another one. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to right click and copy this TGT. And I'll just grab a clear, do I have like a one that's, I'm not logged in? I'm logged in on both of these, right? Yeah, that's fine. I'll just do a new PowerShell session. I could just do it right here. That's fine. And klist, I'm just going to purge my current tickets. Actually, I don't have them here because I have them here. So tickets are per command prompt, right? Just keep that in mind. So this is fine. And then I'm going to do Rubius ask, or I don't have to ask TGT. I'm just going to do PTT, pass the ticket, boom, paste in that base 64. This ticket is actually base 64 encoded, so that's why it looks like this, right? If you actually looked at the raw bytes of the ticket, they would just be like indiscernible, kind of, not real ASCII. Boom. Now if we list tickets, we have a TGT or DC1. And so what can we do? We can do DC sync. How do you do DC sync? A lot of people hear about secret stump. We do not use secret stump in the real world because there is a known issue with secret stump that if the domain is large enough, it can cause issues. To be fair, I don't know the details behind that. I was just told do not use secret stump in a real world environment. But if you're doing like Hack the Box or Try Hack Me or like even the OSCP exam, they're probably not going to have like 300,000 users. That was definitely an exaggeration, but you get the point. So it's fine to use something like secret stump, which is an in-packet tool, right? So if we wanted to do secret stump, actually, instead of importing it here, I would have converted it from Rubius format to Ccache, right? And then I would have used it with in-packet, another option. But what I like to do is I like to use DS internals. So if you go to DS, but this is not installed by default. So if you go to DS internals GitHub, they kind of have the installation command there. So it's very simple, install modules ds internals force. Oh my gosh, why are you doing this, mouse? Boop. Oh, I hate when that happens. When you have something selected like this and you try to right click to paste, it'll actually like copy that, which is just spaces. It's just something that gets really annoying. But whatever, I'll just type it out. DS internals. Boop, boop, boop. What? Oh, because I misspelled it. I was about to be so mad. And then we're going to use, this is not actually talking to the domain controller right now. This is just installing the tool that we're going to use to perform the DC sync, just to make that clear. And now to perform the DC sync, I will copy this from here. And remember that here we are DC1. So we can't DC sync from DC1 because it doesn't make sense for a domain controller to DC sync from itself. So we have to provide another domain controller. So this relies on there being 2 domain controllers in the environment, which by default, almost all the time, there are at least 2 domain controllers in every real world environment. Okay. Yes. Why does it say encoding? Wait. Did I miss something? Oh yeah, ASCII. That makes more sense. So that it's human readable, right? Boom. DC sync, replicating Active Directory objects.
So we get all the things.
Now we have all the things. So if we actually look at what that outputted, we have this DC sync file. And guess what? We have information for all the users, including the KRBTGT account, and we have their NT hash. And remember, the NT hash can be used in place of a password. So, for example, if I wanted to use it with netexec, oh, I can exit out this now. KRBTGT-H to specify the hash. And the account's disabled because you can't log into it, but if it were wrong, it would give us something else. Like, for example, I just chose a really bad example here, but point is, if I may change the 6 to a 7. No, that's not what I meant to. Oh my gosh. Sorry, guys. Okay. 7. Yeah, logon failure. So, yep. And we can, of course, all users are in here, including admin and stuff. This is kind of a mess to work with. I wouldn't mind having a list at this point. At this point, we would run all these hashes through a hash cracker like Hashcat, and we would see how many we can crack, and then we would provide the client with a finding that you wrote up for us, which is weak Active Directory account password. And all of those accounts that cracked, we would put that here, and we would point out ones that are interesting. So for example, if you can crack a password, that doesn't necessarily make it bad in and of itself, because you're not supposed to have access to that NTLM hash in the first place. But where that weak password really becomes relevant is if it's guessable. So to like quantify guessability, we'll come up with things that an attacker might try. So they'll probably try passwords with a variation of the word password. They might try season-year combinations, because those are popular passwords that people use. Every single test, there's at least one winter 2024, summer 2024, or password 1 exclamation point. There's going to be at least one. And of course, hashes that passwords from NetNTLM v1 or v2 hashes that you captured during poisoning, those were crackable, and that gave you domain access, so those being weak is a problem. And service account passwords being weak is a problem because curb roasting, right? Yes. So anyway, but the problem right now is that this is not in a nice format to throw into Hashcat, right? So we have to convert it to a nice format. So to do that, I like to use DS internals parser. That is still DS internals. DS internals parser. Oh my gosh. Why am I not finding it? Normally I look this up on Google and it's like the first thing that comes up. I guess that's just because I search it a lot and go to the same place. But there are a lot of different, well, this is the help screen for it. Oh yeah, I think it is this guy that did it. Oh my gosh. I don't know why I'm struggling to find this right now, but is this the guy that wrote this? This might be a different. Oh. I'm struggling to find the link to it right now, but with enough searching, I'm sure I'd be able to find DS internals parser somewhere. Maybe it's DS internal parser. Maybe they just named it weird. Whatever. I'm not finding it right now. The point is, there's a project on GitHub that is publicly available that called DS Internal Parser that lets you convert that that file into a file that just lists hashes or lists username : hash, right? And then you could use cut in Linux to just grab the hashes and stuff. So yes, so we have compromised the domain, which is really cool. We've definitely gone overtime, so I guess we'll call it a day here. But yeah, sorry, last thing. Once I have domain admin, so like big picture items when you're on a pen test, get domain admin, web, outdated services, and Active Directory, and yeah, those are kind of big ones. Outdated services, get domain admin, web. If you're able to get domain admin from here, our job is not done. Just because we own the domain doesn't mean that we've reported every vulnerability that's in the domain. Now we go back and look for a second attack path that we can take. So I actually put a lot more attack paths in here that I didn't get to show. But yes, we go back and we look for more attack paths. The other thing that I do is I look at my ping castle output, and anything that's relevant from here, I'd write that up too. So for example, Windows 7 should not be in this environment because Windows 7 is unsupported and has known vulnerabilities. So then I just come up with an AD PowerShell command for it. So get AD computer, and then I just do -filter operating system -like star Windows 7 star. They'll get us Windows 7s. Computer, server, DC1, filter. I think it's operating system. And then properties, we want to pull out the SAM account name. I think DNS host name is a thing. And operating system. Go for it.
Oh yes, so thank you everyone for completing a travel behavior and assumptions of risk waiver. Everyone, at least Sarah let me know that everyone completed it. It was, I think she let me know that. If you haven't, you will definitely do that soon. But then the second part of that was concur training. Who did like click on that concur training link and did that in Kits? Oh,
I did, but I didn't complete. I completed, but I didn't email quickly.
okay. And that's so I think, and I actually didn't know about that training till or I just forgot about it until today. So I didn't actually like watch that video. I just concur before. So I forgot about the marking me as a delegate. I forgot how to do that.
Cannot
Your
be using
how you're able to mark me as a delegate.
So remember the difference between an NTLM hash and a net NTLM v1 or net NTLM v2 hash. So in this case, an NTLM v1 and net NTLM v1 hash, you can relay it, but you can't pass it. So relay is immediately using that hash versus pass the hash is trying to use it later on because it has a timestamp. Yep. Yeah.
It's very detailed. It's very detailed.
Yeah, I know. It's really good. I'm trying to give you guys good resources. Like Hacker Recipes is good.
I'm saving it up.
Now I know what you're talking
Yeah.
about. Yes.
No.
I think that is. Oh yes. Okay. I think it's two separate things. I think that's your like account information, which could be